Yeah, so I always, if you would go back and look at my historical talks, I always say, I don't think this will take the whole 30 minutes. And this time I really don't think it'll take the whole 30 minutes or whatever I have left of my 25 minutes even, because this is just, this is a quick update on what we've been up to with this reference binary artifacts effort, a status, where it is, and sort of where it'll be in the next 6 months, in order to raise awareness and see if anybody else is interested in participating in the efforts. So I guess I didn't really introduce myself yesterday, but I'll take some time to try to pad myself out to the 25 minutes today. I'm Bruce Ashfield. I am a principal something or other engineer at AMD now, and as part of what I do there, I work in the directly in the Yocto project, and one of the things I'm doing now is either being brave or not so smart or whatever, sucker for punishment. I'm leading this reference binary artifact effort. We'll skip the overview because you'll see it as we go through here. Whoa. Oh, my IRC is bouncing, but whoever's trolling me, I can't see it. So you'll have to try much harder, like a carrier pigeon or I don't know, something. You got to find out where I live, though, for that. I always start, I've done multiple presentations, and we've talked about this multiple times. I'll start with the following sort of statement that Open Embedded, has a long storied history with packages and binaries, meaning they've been there forever. So we are not talking about inventing anything new on that front. If you want the details of the history of what and how they work, you can see any number of ones that I've done or other people have done about package feeds and how to use them and how to update images and things like that. But yeah, if you need package management, you're probably already enabling your package format of choice, enabling the distro feature package management, and are using them. The idea sort of what this has led into in the modern incantation and format. I know John and I did a presentation at ELCE Lyon. Well, it wasn't actually part of ELCE. It was at the Open Embedded Developers meeting that followed Lyon, if I believe. But that's the first one that we kind of stood up and talked about it. And of course, it's been batted around for years before that as well. So what I'm updating about is this effort, which came out of a 5-year planning activity that the Yocto project through the Yocto members and advisory board went through. And it was one thing that the company I work for is interested in, and hence I was able to easily allocate some of my time towards leading the effort. So we started this effort in early 2021. There's about, 12 or 14 people that I email when we hold a meeting over across, 10 companies or more individuals. There's been draft goals, some phases, some requirements, many priority and vision discussions, lots of hand waving and things like that. And there's roughly bi-monthly meetings. It kind of kicked off in early 2021, and then over the summer, and into the fall, when there was no more in-person conferences, it sort of tapered off a little bit, but it's kicked back up again just in the past month or two, and I'm putting more time towards it myself as well. And we expect, hopefully, fingers crossed, you can't hold me to this, some tangible outputs expected by mid-year, and we are almost to mid-year. So as soon as I get off of Zoom, I'm going to have to go work on it. So the problem statement, or the solution, if you will, of crafted problem statement that leads to the right solution. It is, the proposal is that we want to have a set of reference binaries available for commonly used components to address some of the ease of use concerns, which is what John and I talked about in 2019, lower barriers to adoption, and then to test the core infrastructure for binary artifact maintenance. We would make those available with a defined path back to the standard source-based build your own distribution, open embedded and Yocto and all the other core pillars of the ecosystem. So it's about making a non-partner, non-vendor reference distribution just to prove out and slowly, incrementally make it more available to prove out and test and extend where needed the core pillars that are supporting these binary artifacts. So another thing that I've covered in some of the talks I've done when I do this at conferences in particular is, what do we mean by those two terms? Everybody probably has their own definition. So what do we mean by binary artifacts or ease of use? And so for binary artifacts, I say packages a lot, but it's not. You'll see in some other slides, we're not talking only about packages, right? So this is sort of any of the outputs from a build that can be used or installed on target, or that you use to construct your image. So the architecture and the optimization level are of course defined by the build parameters, and that impacts the level of reusability. And you'll see why that is something that's in one of the early phases of this effort, and that's sort of, in particular for some of the ARM platforms, it's more relevant. And then ease of use, that it's all about making it obvious or clear how you complete your initial steps towards a goal, meaning how do I install an image and boot it just to see what this Yocto thing is, or this open embedded thing is, or I just want, it's the weekend and I don't have a great build machine, but I've got a target board and my boss said I need something by Monday and you just want to boot. It should be obvious, how you complete initial steps towards those goals. And the details of what you do vary by the use case, how complicated it is, and the other, ease of use also, that once you've completed that initial goal, the transitioning to your next use case, your next step, it's A, supported, and B, it's something that's documented. So that's what we put down as the ease of use bar that we're shooting for. Some of the goals and requirements that were set out early on in the meetings that we held was, yes, we're aware of all the things that are there, what exists, what distros there are, what vendors have, we are aware of the existing things around this. So we really don't want to adopt anything existing, but we're equally not looking to displace anything that is existing. Just because there's a quite tightly focused set of initial goals, we don't want to either steal somebody's project, we don't want to overly influence it, and we don't, so we're not looking to adopt anything. It's along the lines of the reference Pocky distro. This would be a binary reference of similar generic nature. The other thing was that the goals and requirements are to use the OE core and Yocto project support for binary artifact maintenance. And that is mainly around making sure the documentation is up to date, the core technology is in place, and we have testing ready to go. Also, that the reference artifacts that we build out of this, they're not hidden. They are available through public, accessible infrastructure for the commonly used components, and lower those barriers to adoption. So that would be, and that's for two architectures at first, which would be x86-64 and ARM64. There also would be a defined way to extend to the broader ecosystem or vendor artifacts through SDK, ESDK. Of course, reference Richard's email that he sent recently on ESDK, what it is, how it works, how it might need to be redesigned. There might be some of this that can play into that discussion. But the whole point is that it's tightly focused initially, but there are defined ways to embrace and extend those common packages. And that it would have no real release, because initially, absolutely, it's not It's not a product. Well, it never will be a product, but so it's sort of rolling release / no release. So we'll be testing on sort of an ongoing basis without any real stakes in the ground about support or that sort of thing. So out of all that, the important things that I emphasize is that we're focusing on the plumbing, the infrastructure, and the best practices. So we're not most of what we need is already there, and it's all about proving it out, making it more visible, making it, improving the documentation and that sort of thing around most of the plumbing. And that's all the hard work that's gone into everything from estate and the reproducibility, and all of those efforts have enhanced the infrastructure that we need for the sort of binary outputs. We're looking to reuse, not reinvent, modulo my point about not reusing an existing distribution which has their own path charted. I said before, it's a reference, not a product. We want well-defined capabilities and packages with tangible components, meaning, yes, there will be a set of default package configs and configurations that are being built, and those will be well-defined and documented. It is not optimized, so we'll choose tunings and machines that make the binary packages the most reusable and generic as possible. And if you want something optimized, that's where you build your own distribution. You go to an OSV or some combination of the above. Extension is the important thing. We always want to have that path back to a full source build. And then, of course, what you do in your full source build is you will then be feeding back into your package feed, so you can extend it yourself and continue to blend the different things that you need. And that is always supposed to be consistent with the Yocto project messaging and core competencies, meaning, things like license artifacts, SBOM, reproducible builds. This stays consistent with those messaging and core features. And again, not associated with a particular member or existing distro. Now, this is the slide that I was sort of hinting about when I started, is that I say package, 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 but when you hear that, we're not only talking about binary packages, because that's sort of been done, and 1993 called it wants its deb back. This is a slide that I think Mark Hatley and I presented at, maybe it was Linaro Connect, maybe it was ELC, I can't remember. They all blur together. And so we're talking about more than packages as these binary artifacts and outputs. So it's everything from containers to SDKs to kernels to, you name it, bootloaders. Those can all be considered for this reference, some of the binary outputs. And they could be package feed, they could be artifact registries, they could be Docker Hub, they're consumable through any number of different ways. And this little chart that we have here is showing sort of, if you're a binary or source, there's certain things, depending on what you're doing on this spectrum, where you are able to potentially reuse a binary reference with some difficulty easily, or then as you slide your requirements, you move to different parts of the hard scale, the easy scale, and binary and source. So, if you need, for example, universal packages, that can be with binaries, that can be harder. Or if you need container builds, that's easier with source than it is with binaries, for example. So there's different, depending on what your requirements are, you move around in this sort of 2D. Well, this is our effort to visualize it, but it's not easy to point it out till you get into the details of all of the individual gotchas with doing any of these in a binary format. So as I was saying, the thing here is about beyond packages, things to consider. Reproducibility plays into this quite significantly. licensing, SBOM. You can't just be putting out binaries without the licensing, everything that goes along with it, and you shouldn't also be consuming them unless you can also get that and blend it into your on-package feed without being able to do a collective accumulation of all of those artifacts. Customization is important still, and you will need to customize, but you'd still like to be able to reuse, because I always say I don't think a lot of people in the ecosystem are really differentiating based on how well they build core utils or bash or some of these really common binaries. So yes, there is a level of customization that is always happens, but there's also some parts that just they don't particularly need to be optimized and customized. We want to be able to support. We want to do something that can be supportable throughout the ecosystem, whether it be an OSV or another layer or another project, depending on how, if you've modified it heavily, if you haven't modified it or not, that might change how you can get supported. But the goal is to not rule out being able to support what we're doing here throughout the different ecosystem. We do want to support both application and system developers, and that sort of goes into things like the ESDK, the SDK, container images for application developers, and you also want to support system developers. So in that case, there might be more rebuilds and less consuming of the binary outputs if they are working on the kernel or the platform or something like that. But we both are kept in mind. And of course, how will you support it, how will you maintain it, and how will it be updated are things to consider when you're moving beyond packages. Because if you take up packages and you consume base container images, well, then there's still a support, maintenance, and update question that needs to be answered. We are currently in phase 1.5. These are sort of the really rough. I took a whole bunch of meetings and distilled the phases down into a few little bullet points. So phase 0 was really just talking about it, which was the preparation that I did, some planning, some prioritization of various the requirements really that I've been talking about. That's how we came to those, was through phase 0. Phase 1 was definition and documentation, which would be, what do we want the images to look like? What are the tunes? What are the architectures? What are the target boards? What kind of documentation do we think we'll need? And those are things that we talked about during the meetings, and outside of the exact image definitions, maybe with a few extensions, those have all been defined, and you saw them sprinkled through my status slides. Phase 2, which is what we're just moving into now, is actually doing, setting up CI/CD, nightly, weekly testing, doing the image deployment, working on some of making the actual binary outputs available. That is a little bit held up on finding the infrastructure to host those, but I think we have a path roughly charted through that now, and then we need to actually start working on it. It was something that we didn't want to get into until after the summit came and went, because this itself is consuming resources of that same infrastructure that we might need. And then phase 3, everything's working great, it's up and running, it's stable, and then it's about extend and maintain. So looking into producing some of those reference containers. Are they on Docker Hub? Is there a container registry hosted by the project itself? How do we expand out further to bring in, say, things like meta virtualization and meta open embedded and different things, and then selecting and extending ourselves out to hardware references, because for the first quite long time we will only be doing QEMU as the targets, because we are working on proving that plumbing and making sure everything else works, not fighting with hardware and acquiring boards and labs and that sort of thing. But if anybody's interested in helping with those hardware references, we're definitely interested in hearing. So I just covered this, but there's all sorts of ways that we could go in the effort for ecosystem integration. expanding, like I mentioned, outside of OE core, because as we all know, you quite quickly, depending on what you're doing, will need packages and capabilities that are from outside of OE core itself. What container frameworks do we want to support? Of course, I have opinions on that, but it's something to actually document and look into. How does this integrate with updaters? Do we have a way to take what we're doing and do the back end to get the right formatting such that some of the ecosystem updaters can work directly on top of the package feed as part of the reference? New image formats, meaning complex. Maybe we're talking fit images. Maybe we're talking multi-partition images. Maybe we're talking user merge. Like different types of more complex image formats, and then seeing how that plays with the binary artifacts. And of course, out there, I know we've talked about it in the past, and we haven't talked about it much in these meetings yet, but it's like, what is as part of that documentation, the getting started, the ease of use, is there an installer? And if there was one, what would it look like? Or is it just put in an SD card and DD the image to it and go nuts? But something to look into sort of way down the road in this effort. And then I will finish with my call to action. You can join us at any time. We need development resources as well as input. So if you know of any tools, if you have documentation, if you have compute resources, test cycles, whatever you might have that might help with this effort, absolutely bring it up, mention it. There is no specific email list for this. We could create one, but there hasn't been the need for it yet. So you can either email me, or you can just send an email to the Yocto project main mailing list, and it'll definitely find the right people. And we also hang out on a zero traffic IRC channel on IRC with hashtag Yocto reference binary distro. I think, I'm not sure. I'd have to go look it up to know exactly what it is. But anyway, if you are interested and you have anything you'd like to contribute, then by all means do reach out.